Ethan Sullivan rode up the long, dusty road toward his parents' homestead, the sun hanging low in the Texas sky. The creak of his saddle and the rhythmic clop of his horse's hooves were the only sounds as he approached the ranch after 6 long months on the cattle drive. His body ached from the ride, and the dust of the plains clung to his clothes. He had expected to find things just as they had been when he left, a quiet, familiar life with his aging parents and the homestead they'd built. But nothing prepared him for what he saw. As Ethan neared the house, he slowed his horse, noticing a movement in the window. At first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks on him, but then he saw her, a woman inside, bent over his father's bed. His heart lurched. His father, who had always been strong and proud, lay in the bed, pale and still. His mother, usually full of life, sat in a wheelchair beside him, her face weary and lined with time. The woman in the room was feeding his father, her delicate hands gently lifting a spoon to his lips. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to the holster on his side, his fingers curling around the grip of his pistol. Who was this woman? What was she doing in his parents' home, caring for them as if she belonged there? He swung off his horse with a determination he hadn't felt in months, marching up to the front door. He threw it open without hesitation, the heavy wood slamming against the wall. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, his voice sharp with a mix of confusion and anger. The woman looked up in surprise, her eyes wide with shock. She quickly rose from her chair, moving to step back. I'm Ella Grace Thornton," she said, her voice calm but steady. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here? Where are my parents?" His heart hammered in his chest as his gaze flicked to the bed, where his father lay motionless. Is this some kind of trick? But his parents, despite their weakened state, came to her defense. "Ethan," his mother's voice was hoarse but firm. "You've been gone so long. Ella's been taking care of us. We needed her." His father, still pale but alert enough, nodded weakly. "She's been a godsend, son. We couldn't manage without her." Ethan's mind reeled. He had left for the cattle drive months ago, expecting to return to the same quiet life. But now, standing here, his parents, once strong and independent, were completely dependent on this stranger. And the woman, Ella, looked more like a ghost than anything else. Young, delicate features, with soft brown hair tied in a loose braid, she didn't seem to belong in this rough, dusty homestead. The lines of her dress were worn, and her eyes, tired but not defeated, spoke of someone who had endured a great deal. 3 months ago, we had an accident," Ethan's mother explained, her voice faltering. "Your father had a stroke. I fell shortly after. We couldn't take care of ourselves, Ethan. Ella came to help us, and we couldn't do it without her." Ethan's mind raced, guilt and suspicion gnawing at him. How could he have left them alone for so long, not knowing they were struggling? But there was something else, something about Ella. His eyes flicked to her, and for the first time, he noticed the quiet resilience in her posture, the way she held herself as if the weight of the world rested on her slender shoulders. "Why?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter now, but still tinged with distrust. "Why would you do this? Why stay here with my parents?" Ella's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. "I'm a widow, Mr. Sullivan. I lost my husband in a ranch accident 2 years ago. I had nowhere else to go. I work for $3 a month, plus room and board. I'm just trying to get by." Ethan's jaw tightened. The town had whispered about her. She was the woman who had lost 2 employers in the span of a few years. The one they called cursed. No one wanted to hire her, and she had lived a life of quiet hardship. Now, here she was, in his home, caring for his parents when no one else would. But there was something about her that intrigued him, despite the cold whispers of the town. Something in her eyes, the quiet strength that spoke volumes without saying a word. "I didn't ask for charity," Ella said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "But I promised your parents I'd stay. I'll leave if you want me to, Mr. Sullivan. I don't want to cause any trouble." Ethan stood there for a moment, his mind spinning. He felt ashamed that he had left his parents to fend for themselves, ashamed that he hadn't been there when they needed him most. But what could he do now? Fine, he said, his voice hoarse, his anger fading into confusion. You can stay for now, but I'm not going to forget this. As the night fell, Ethan found himself alone, sitting at the table, his thoughts racing. His parents had been taken care of, yes, but at what cost? And why had Ella Grace Thornton come to his parents' aid in the first place? Unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right, Ethan decided to investigate further. That night, he slipped quietly out of the house and made his way to the barn, where he had seen Ella sleeping earlier. When he opened the door, he found her curled up on a pile of hay, the only warmth coming from the lantern beside her. She had given up her own bed for his mother's comfort. As Ethan looked at her, exhausted but peaceful, he couldn't help but feel a strange mix of admiration and guilt. The woman had given everything for his parents, and for that, she deserved more than he had to offer. But what was she really after? And why had she chosen to stay? He didn't know the answers yet, but he was determined to find out. As he stood in the doorway, Ella stirred, waking at the sound of his footsteps. She blinked up at him, a faint smile on her lips. I didn't mean to intrude, Mr. Sullivan. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step closer and watched her, searching her face for something he couldn't quite name. What made you stay? He finally asked, his voice low. Ella paused, her fingers tightening around the quilt she had wrapped herself in. Because someone needed to, she said quietly. Ethan stood there, his thoughts tangled. He didn't know what to make of her. This woman who had come in his life so suddenly, changing everything he thought he knew about loyalty and duty. But one thing was clear. The discovery of Ella Grace Thornton would change his life forever. As Ethan turned to leave, Ella called after him, her voice soft. I'll be here, Mr. Sullivan, if you ever need me. Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken promises. Over the next few weeks, Ethan found himself unable to ignore the quiet strength that Ella brought to the homestead, and he began to reassess his initial judgment. He moved her into a proper room in the house, offering her more privacy and better accommodations than she had previously, and raised her wages to $15 a month, a sum 5 times more than she had been earning. Ella resisted at first, refusing to accept charity, but Ethan insisted, seeing it as a small token of appreciation for her dedication. As they worked side by side, the bond between them deepened. Ethan took on the heavy labor, fixing fences, repairing the water pump, and tending to the cattle, while Ella focused on caring for his parents, making sure they had the proper meals and medications. Slowly, Ethan saw his parents' health stabilize. They were eating better, and Ella's careful attention had brought them back from the brink. In the evenings, they shared meals together, and their conversations lingered long into the night on the porch, where they talked about everything from the weather to their pasts. Ella had been a school teacher before her husband's death, and Ethan had left home at a young age, always feeling like he was never good enough for his father. They found common ground in their loneliness, understanding each other in ways neither had expected. One day, they took a trip to town together for supplies, but the welcome was anything but warm. The townspeople gave Ella cold stares and whispered behind her back, and when they tried to shop for goods, the storekeeper refused to serve her, calling her bad luck. Ethan didn't hesitate for a second. He stood up, his voice firm and commanding. Serve her or lose my business. It was the first time he had publicly defended her, and it made something shift between them. Later, Ethan caught Ella singing softly to herself in the barn, something she hadn't done since her husband had passed. It was a small, tender moment, and as they shared more quiet conversations about their losses, the physical attraction between them began to build. They were drawn to each other in ways they couldn't ignore. But the growing closeness was complicated when Ethan overheard his parents talking about pushing him and Ella together. They thought it was only natural, but Ethan felt manipulated. He pulled back emotionally, and Ella, sensing the sudden distance, confronted him. The tension between them was palpable as they faced each other in the barn one night. "What's changed?" Ella asked, her voice steady but tinged with hurt. Ethan, unable to keep his feelings buried any longer, admitted that he had overheard his parents' matchmaking plan. He confessed that he had been thinking about her anyway, despite his reservations. Ella, her voice trembling, revealed her fear of losing everything she had ever loved, her heart scarred by her late husband's promises that had been broken by death. Ethan, in a moment of clarity, took her hand and promised her he wasn't afraid of her curse. The kiss they shared was slow, tender, and filled with months of unspoken longing. But the moment was cut short when Ethan's former business partner, Henry Hutchins, arrived with news of a life-changing cattle contract that would take Ethan away for 4 months. The promise of a secure future for his family and his ranch loomed before him. But it was a decision that would test his newfound feelings for Ella. Ethan stood at the crossroads of duty and desire, torn between his love for Ella and the opportunity that could change everything for his family. The days that followed were filled with unease as Ethan wrestled with the impossible choice before him. Henry Hutchins had brought news of a massive cattle contract that could secure the future of his family, pay off the mortgage on the homestead, and give him the financial freedom to finally provide the life he had always wanted for his parents. The opportunity was too big to ignore, but it came with a catch. Ethan would have to leave immediately and be gone for 4 months. He hadn't been home in 6 months already, and his heart clenched at the thought of leaving again so soon. But this was a chance to right the wrongs of his past, to prove to his parents and to himself that he could be the man they had always hoped he would be. He knew the work would be hard, and the time away would feel like an eternity, but it seemed like the only way to secure a better life for everyone. He needed to do this. But there was something about the idea of leaving Ella behind that gnawed at him. She had become more than just a caretaker to his parents. She had become a part of the family, someone whose quiet strength and tenderness had pulled them all from the brink of despair. And yet, there was the bitter truth that he had never promised her anything. He couldn't. The town's whispers about her cursed reputation still hung over her like a dark cloud, and Ethan had never been able to fully shake his own suspicions, no matter how much he admired her. The more he thought about it, the more tangled his emotions became. Ella, for her part, never asked for anything, and she insisted that he take the contract. "I'll take care of her parents," she said, her voice steady. But Ethan could hear the underlying strain in her words. He knew she was bracing for the inevitable abandonment, and that only made him feel worse. He hated the idea of leaving her behind, but he was torn between his duty to his family and his growing feelings for her. As if his inner turmoil wasn't enough, the situation was further complicated when the town council arrived at the homestead one afternoon, led by the Reverend. They had heard about Ella's living arrangement with Ethan's parents and demanded that she leave, deeming it immoral and improper for an unmarried woman to live under the same roof with a man, even if that man was her employer. The council threatened to report her to the county authorities, and Ethan could feel the anger bubbling up inside him. He had already been more than patient with the town's narrow-mindedness, and this was the final straw. He stepped forward, his fists clenched, and said, "If you want to report her, go ahead, but know this. If Ella leaves, I leave. And I'll make sure every person in this town knows exactly why." The council members backed off, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Would he be ruining Ella's reputation by keeping her there? Was he being selfish by allowing his emotions to cloud his judgment? That night, as Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he tried to sort through his conflicting feelings. His parents had always insisted that he take every opportunity to make something of himself, and the cattle contract was the kind of chance he couldn't afford to pass up. They encouraged him to go, promising that Ella would take care of them in his absence. He knew they were right. They would be fine. But was Ella? Would she still be there when he returned, or would she slip away leaving him with nothing but regret? The next morning, Ethan made up his mind. He would take the contract. He had to. It was the right thing to do for his family, even if it meant leaving Ella behind. He found her in the barn, mending one of his father's shirts by the light of a lantern. "I've made my decision," he told her, his voice heavy with the weight of it. "I'm going. The cattle contract, it's too important. I have to go." Ella didn't look up from her work. Her hands moved with practiced precision, her fingers deftly stitching the fabric. "Of course," she replied quietly, her tone flat. "It's the right choice." But Ethan could see the faint tremor in her shoulders, the way her hands shook as she worked. He wanted to reach out to her, to tell her that everything would be all right, but he knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep. The truth was, he didn't know what the future held. But he did know that he couldn't be the man he wanted to be for Ella if he didn't seize this opportunity. "I'll come back for you," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I get back, we'll make this work. I promise." Ella looked up then, her eyes tired but steady. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Ethan." Her voice cracked slightly, and Ethan's heart broke at the sound of it. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came. Instead, he stood there in silence, watching her fight back tears. The weight of his decision crushed him, but he couldn't turn back now. The morning of his departure came all too quickly. Ella was nowhere to be seen. When Ethan went to find her, he was told that she had gone to town for supplies. She hadn't said goodbye. His heart sank as he mounted his horse, ready to leave. But as he rode away, he glanced back at the homestead one last time. There, standing in the window, was Ella's silhouette, watching him leave. It was the last thing he saw before he rode over the hill, leaving the only home he had ever known, and the woman who had changed everything behind. But as Ethan rode on, determined to reach the town and begin his journey to secure a better future, a plume of smoke caught his eye. Rising in the distance, thick and black against the sky, was the unmistakable sign of a fire. His heart pounded as he spurred his horse into a gallop. Something was wrong. He didn't know what, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The fire was coming from the general store in town, and as Ethan neared, chaos erupted around him. People were screaming, running in every direction, some pulling others to safety, others trapped inside. He dismounted quickly and ran toward the building, ignoring the heat and the thick smoke that made it hard to breathe. Through the crowd, he saw her, Ella, standing near the entrance, helping pull people from the flames. But as she reached for another woman, a beam collapsed, pinning Ella beneath it. Ethan's heart stopped. Time seemed to slow as he saw her there, unconscious, trapped in the debris. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe. All that mattered was getting to her. He ran into the burning building without a second thought, ignoring the danger. He found her, her face pale and covered in soot, but alive. He dragged her out of the wreckage, just as the roof caved in behind them. As he held her in his arms, the realization hit him harder than the heat of the flames. Nothing mattered without her. Ella was alive, but would she survive? Would the love he had only just begun to embrace be lost forever? Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he pulled Ella from the burning building, feeling the weight of the moment pressing on him with every step. The flames roared around them, and the heat seared his skin, but all he could think about was her. How fragile she seemed in his arms, how much he needed her, how much she had already given for his family. When they finally reached the safety of the street, Ethan collapsed to his knees, still holding Ella close, praying she would wake up. The doctor arrived soon after, his face grim as he checked Ella's pulse and breathing. "She's alive, but it's touch and go," he said. "The smoke inhalation is serious. We'll have to wait the next 24 hours to see if she pulls through." Ethan's mind was reeling, but one thing was clear: he wasn't going anywhere. He didn't care about the cattle contract, didn't care about the life he had planned to build. He had nearly lost her, and there was no way he was going to leave her side now. As the hours passed, Ethan's world narrowed to the small room where Ella lay, unconscious but stable. He refused to leave, even when Henry arrived with the promise of the cattle deal still waiting for him. Henry's offer was tempting, but it felt like a lifetime away. "We leave now, Ethan, or we lose the contract," Henry urged, but Ethan was resolute. "Then we lose it." "I'm not leaving her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Henry stormed off in frustration, but Ethan barely noticed. Nothing mattered but Ella. As the night wore on, Ethan's parents arrived, Caleb leaning heavily on his cane, Lisa in her wheelchair. Caleb, despite his own frailty, insisted on sitting with Ethan, offering quiet comfort in his own way. "I was too hard on you growing up," Caleb admitted, his voice low. "I made you feel like you had to do it all alone. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't be afraid to need someone." Ethan didn't know how to respond, but the weight of his father's words settled on his shoulders. Lisa, though weak, smiled softly, her eyes full of pride. "She's already family, son," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. Ethan felt a surge of gratitude for his parents, but it was nothing compared to the overwhelming love he felt for Ella. He wasn't just fighting for her now. He was fighting for a future they could have together. When Ella finally woke, she was disoriented, her eyes searching for something she couldn't quite place. "The cattle drive," she murmured, as if that was the only thing that mattered. Ethan gently took her hand, his voice soft but firm. "There'll be other contracts. There's only one you," he said. Ella's eyes filled with tears as she realized he had stayed. "You stayed," she whispered. Ethan leaned down, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "I'm never leaving again," he promised. "Not without you." Over the next few days, Ella's condition improved. The smoke inhalation had taken a toll, but her spirit remained unbroken. Ethan spent every moment at her side, nursing her back to health as best he could, his parents helping in any way they could. The ranch had fallen quiet, the bustle of work replaced by quiet care, but Ethan knew this was where he was meant to be. As Ella regained her strength, the bond between them deepened. It wasn't just the fire that had changed everything. It was the realization that they were stronger together than apart. They had both lost so much in their lives, but now they had something real. The town, however, was less welcoming. The council, still holding on to their narrow-minded views, came with a new ultimatum. Ella had to leave or face charges of moral corruption for living under the same roof as Ethan without the benefit of marriage. The news hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He didn't have the money for a proper wedding, not with the ranch struggling and no way to pay for such a thing. The idea of asking Ella to marry him without the proper means made him feel like a failure. But the thought of losing her was unbearable. As Ella overheard his conversation with the lawyer, she realized the weight of the decision Ethan was facing. In the dead of night, she quietly packed her things, leaving a note behind. "I won't be the reason your family loses everything. Thank you for seeing me. Ella Grace." Ethan woke up to find her gone, the house empty, the note a painful reminder of how deeply she had cared for him and his family. Days passed, and Ethan searched desperately for any sign of her. His parents, too, were heartbroken, knowing how much Ella had given. A week later, a stranger arrived at the homestead with news that shattered Ethan's heart. Ella had been seen boarding a stagecoach to San Antonio. She was gone for good. Ethan's world crumbled. He collapsed in despair, feeling as though the very ground had been ripped from beneath him. He had let fear and pride dictate his decisions, and now he had lost her. Would Ethan find Ella before it was too late, or had he already lost her forever? Ethan's heart was a hollow shell as he rode aimlessly through the barren plains, his mind consumed by the emptiness Ella had left behind. The house felt like a ghost of what it had been just days ago, the once vibrant, bustling ranch now silent. His parents, who had come to accept Ella as one of their own, were equally devastated. His father, usually a man of few words, seemed to have aged 10 years overnight. Lisa, in her wheelchair, gazed out the window, every morning as if waiting for a miracle. But the miracle never came. Each day felt like an eternity, the weight of regret pressing on Ethan's chest like an iron shackle. He couldn't believe he had let her slip away, all because of his pride and the fear that he couldn't provide her with the life she deserved. His internal battle was a constant torment. The truth was, he loved Ella more than he had ever loved anything. Her quiet strength, the tenderness she had shown him and his parents, her fierce loyalty, everything about her called to him in a way nothing else ever had. But his fear of not being enough, of losing everything in the pursuit of something he couldn't even promise, kept him from taking the step that would have made her truly his. Now, with Ella gone, he felt like half a man. His heart was in pieces, and the emptiness inside him felt unbearable. His parents, seeing the pain in his eyes, took matters into their own hands. One morning, Lisa wheeled herself into the kitchen, where Ethan sat hunched over a cup of cold coffee, staring at nothing. "What are you waiting for, Ethan?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with a gentle urgency. "You know what you need to do. Go get her." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't even look up. "I don't have anything to offer her, Ma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not the man she deserves. I don't have money for a proper wedding, no ring to offer her. I can't give her what she needs." Lisa's eyes softened, and she reached out, taking his hand in hers. "You have yourself, Ethan. That's enough. Love doesn't need fancy things. You have everything she wants right here." She placed her hand over his heart. "Go get her. You don't have to be perfect. Just go." Caleb, too, offered his quiet support. "Your mother's right, son," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We've been waiting for you to come to this decision. Don't wait any longer. She's worth it." That was all Ethan needed to hear. The next morning, he saddled his horse and prepared to leave, not knowing exactly where Ella had gone, but knowing he had to find her. He could no longer sit idly by and let fear dictate his life. The journey to San Antonio would be long, but Ethan was resolved. He couldn't let the woman he loved slip through his fingers again. He rode hard, pushing his horse through the unforgiving terrain, determined to find Ella and tell her everything that had been weighing on his heart. Each night, he stayed at small inns along the way, asking everyone he met if they had seen a quiet, strong woman with soft brown hair, but no one knew where she had gone. He didn't give up. For 3 days, he rode, each mile bringing him closer to his goal, each stop filled with a sense of growing dread that he might be too late. When he finally reached San Antonio, he headed straight for the boarding houses and inns. One by one, he asked about Ella. The response was always the same. No one had seen her. Desperation began to claw at him as he wondered if he had already lost her. It was his worst fear, one that gnawed at him with every passing hour. But then, as he was preparing to leave the last boarding house, the innkeeper stopped him. "Wait a minute," the old man said, his face thoughtful. "There was a woman here a few days ago. Quiet, sad-looking. I didn't get her name, but she paid for a room and then left. She didn't say where she was going." Ethan's heart raced. "Do you know where she went?" he asked urgently. The innkeeper shook his head, but then his eyes brightened. "I remember her asking about work. She said she was looking for a seamstress job, but she didn't seem very hopeful. She was heading toward the outskirts of town, I think. There's a shop down there." Without a second thought, Ethan mounted his horse and rode in the direction the innkeeper had pointed. His hands gripped the reins so tightly his knuckles turned white. The streets of San Antonio were bustling with life, but to Ethan, everything felt like a blur. The only thing that mattered was finding Ella. After what felt like hours of searching, he finally reached a small, quiet seamstress shop at the edge of town. The sign outside read, "Madeline's Sewing and Alterations." His heart skipped a beat. He dismounted and stepped inside, the bell above the door ringing softly. The shop was small but neat, and a few women were working at sewing machines. One of them, a woman with brown hair, tied up in a simple bun, looked up as Ethan entered. His breath caught in his throat. "Ella," he whispered. She looked up, startled, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them spoke, but the world seemed to stop around them. Ella's face was pale, her eyes full of surprise and pain. She didn't say anything at first, as if she couldn't quite believe he was standing there. But then, with a soft, broken voice, she said, "Ethan, what are you doing here?" He stepped forward, unable to stop the words that poured out. "I came to bring you home," he said, his voice trembling. "I was wrong. I was afraid. I thought I couldn't give you what you deserved. But I was wrong. I don't care about money or fancy things. I only care about you." Tears welled up in Ella's eyes as she stepped back, shaking her head. "I don't have a home anymore, Ethan. I can't go back to that life." Ethan's heart shattered at the thought of her leaving again. "You do have a home, Ella. It's with me. I don't have everything figured out, but I promise you, you'll never be invisible again. I'll choose you every single day." He knelt down on one knee, ignoring the women in the shop who had gathered to watch. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his mother's ring. "Ella Grace Thornton, will you marry me?" Ella gasped, her hands trembling as she looked down at the ring, then up at Ethan. Her eyes were full of disbelief, but behind the shock, there was something else, a flicker of hope, of possibility. She didn't say anything for a moment, and Ethan's heart sank, but then, with a shaky breath, she whispered, "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." He stood, pulling her into his arms as the women in the shop cheered softly. He kissed her then, tenderly, as if the world had finally fallen into place. As they pulled away, Ella looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I was so afraid you'd forgotten me." Ethan smiled, his heart full. "Impossible. You've been written on my heart from the moment I met you." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had found something far more important than a life of riches or perfection. True love, built on trust, sacrifice, and the promise of a future they would create together. As they stepped out of the shop, hand in hand, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed behind them. Would the town accept their love, or would they have to fight for their happiness once more? The wagons appeared on the horizon just as Ethan and Ella rode back to the homestead, their hands intertwined. The weight of the journey between them now a shared memory and the promise of a future ahead. Ethan's heart, once a heavy stone, had lightened over the past days as he'd watched Ella accept his proposal. Her smile soft and full of hope, her eyes no longer shadowed with uncertainty. Their journey back had been full of conversation, laughter, and stolen glances. They spoke of their plans for the future, simple things like tending to the ranch, restoring the homestead, and building a life that was theirs free of judgment, free of the ghosts of the past. Ella admitted, in a quiet moment, that she had been on her way to disappear, to leave behind everything when Ethan had found her. She had thought she wasn't worthy of love or a family, that she would always be burdened by the mistakes of others. But now, as they approached the ranch, the weight of the past seemed lighter, as if the very act of returning to a place that had once been so full of sorrow could now be a place of joy. They reached the homestead, only to find that the wagons weren't filled with the town's council, as Ethan had feared, but with the very neighbors who had come to their aid in the aftermath of the fire. The families who had helped when the flames had threatened to consume everything they held dear had returned, not to judge them, but to celebrate with them. They had come to help prepare for a quick wedding, bringing food, decorations, and flowers to make the ceremony special, even if the event itself was simple. The presence of the neighbors, the warmth in their smiles, and the genuine joy in their eyes made Ethan's heart swell with an unexpected sense of community. These were the people who had seen Ella for who she truly was, strong, compassionate, and unyielding in her love for his parents, and had embraced her without judgment. It was a stark contrast to the coldness of the town council, whose disapproval of their love had been rooted in superstition and fear. As Ella, with Lisa's help, prepared for the ceremony, the men worked to set up the yard for the celebration. The homestead, once a place of loss and pain, now buzzed with the energy of new beginnings. Lisa, despite her wheelchair-bound state, was full of emotion as she oversaw the preparations, her face flushed with joy. She had seen Ethan grow from a young boy full of anger and resentment into a man who was capable of love and sacrifice. Her heart swelled with pride as she watched him with Ella, the woman who had not only cared for them, but had also captured Ethan's heart in a way that no one else ever had. Caleb, too, had found a sense of purpose in the days leading up to the wedding. Despite his frailty, he had insisted on helping with the preparations, working alongside Ethan to repair the fence and make the yard ready for the ceremony. His pride in his son, in the man Ethan had become, was evident in every word he spoke. It was a quiet reconciliation between father and son, one that neither had expected, but both needed. As the wedding drew near, the ranch had transformed. The barn was decorated with wildflowers, and the scent of freshly baked bread and roasting meats filled the air. Neighbors gathered, chatting and laughing, while Ethan and Ella stood side by side, taking in the moment. The quiet tension that had once hung between them, the uncertainty about their future, had been replaced with something new, something solid, something that could withstand whatever came their way. The ceremony itself was simple, just as Ella had always imagined. There were no extravagant gowns or lavish decorations, just a minister who had agreed to officiate without question, a few close witnesses, and the love of a community that had finally seen past the rumors and superstition. Ethan stood at the altar, his eyes focused on Ella, who wore a simple dress of lace and cotton, her brown hair loosely curled, a wreath of wildflowers in her hair. She looked more beautiful than he had ever imagined, not because of her appearance, but because of the way she had transformed his world. As they exchanged vows, Ethan's voice was steady but filled with emotion. "I vow to see you always, to choose you every day, to build a home where you are never a stranger, where you're always welcome, always loved." His words were a promise, a commitment to a future that wasn't guaranteed, but one that he would fight for with everything he had. Ella, her voice soft but unwavering, spoke her vows. "I vow to trust you, even when fear whispers, to build a life with you, not despite our scars, but because of them. I promise to love you, not just for what you've done for me, but for the man you are, for the family we'll create together." As they exchanged rings, his mother's ring for Ella, and a simple band that Ella had bought for him in San Antonio. The crowd around them cheered softly, the joy in their faces a reflection of the love that had brought Ethan and Ella together. After the ceremony, the celebration continued. The men and women of the community came together to feast, share stories, and dance. The music of a fiddler filled the air, and Ethan and Ella shared their first dance as husband and wife. It was a dance of pure joy, a celebration of the life they had found in each other. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect. As the evening wore on, Ella shared an emotional moment with Ethan's father, Caleb, who had always been wary of her. She had once been the curse of the town, but now, in his eyes, she was family. He had witnessed her strength firsthand, how she had cared for his son, how she had shown him what true love and loyalty looked like. Caleb took her hand and whispered, "You're not cursed, Ella. You've been a blessing to this family." Ella's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. "I never thought I'd have a family again." The evening ended with quiet conversations and laughter, the bonds of a new family forged. As Ethan and Ella made their way to their new life together, they knew that the road ahead would not be without its challenges. The town's council still harbored their disapproval, and Ella's reputation would never be entirely free of the rumors that had once followed her. But for the first time in years, they both felt truly seen, not by the judgments of others, but by the love they had found in each other. The town might have rejected them, but they had created their own community, one built on trust, sacrifice, and the unwavering belief that love could overcome any obstacle. In the weeks that followed, the town began to change. The once hostile neighbors slowly warmed to Ella, and some even apologized for their past behavior, though they did so hesitantly. Ella, with her quiet grace, accepted their apologies, but kept her distance, knowing that some things could never be fully erased. Life on the ranch flourished. Ella took up teaching local children to read, while Ethan worked alongside her, helping to manage the ranch. Caleb's health improved, and Lisa, though still bound to her wheelchair, found joy in her new role as a grandmother, watching the family she had fought for grow. One spring morning, Ella discovered that she was pregnant. The news filled Ethan with joy and overwhelming emotion. He had never thought he would be a father, but now, as he looked at the future he had built with Ella, he knew that the greatest gift was yet to come. Ella, though initially fearful, was reassured by Ethan's unwavering support. "We'll face this together," he promised her, his hand resting on her growing belly. In the months that followed, the ranch thrived. The once skeptical townspeople began to see the change in Ethan and Ella. They had gone from being the town's pariahs to being a symbol of love, perseverance, and community. The curse that had once haunted Ella was now a distant memory, and in its place stood a family bound not by blood, but by choice.